down to business.
That's the nectar of the gods, baby.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the #1 liquid-fueled, liquid-lubricated show on the interwebs. This is the Whiskey Musings broadcast, and I am your host, Rick. So tonight, I've seen this meme running around, and I'll show you the meme here in a minute, running around on social media and everything. But it's a joking meme, but it also kind of sums up a little bit of what we're seeing in today's political climate in terms of conservatives versus, they call it liberals in the meme, but realistically, this is more like a leftist versus conservative setup. But realistically, I mean, this kind of discusses and shows what type of society that we have broken down into. And there's absolutely no doubt that what we have right now is a couple different facets, a couple different camps being set up within our country today. And we have, people who are on the right or on the conservative side of the aisle, and we have people who are on the left, leftists, liberals, I'm kind of in the belief that liberals are not quite in the camp of like the leftists would be. But that being said, we do have two separate opposing or dichotomies. I guess maybe that's not the correct term, but still, we have two opposing viewpoints that are showing up very, very prevalent in today's society. And unfortunately, with today's political climate, we have these people that are trying to push us further and further in one direction. And so I thought tonight I would kind of talk a little bit about the conservative side, about the conservatism movement, about what conservatives actually believe in and what they kind of focus on. And this is more of a generality. It's kind of focused a little bit more on me because I consider myself obviously a conservative. So not all of these values are going to be the exact same. But in general, if you are a conservative, you will find that many, many conservatives, I might even say the large majority of conservatives, will actually fall within these categories that I'm going to discuss. But before I do that, I need to, of course, thank you, my subscribers and my viewers and my listeners over on Spreaker, the viewers on YouTube, listeners on Spreaker, because of the fact that without you, this show wouldn't be of any importance, to be honest with you. And also, I want to say, please do me a favor. If you like the program, not only subscribe, but I also would appreciate it if you would head over to the Whiskey Musings logo gear store on the web at store.whiskeymusings, all one word, .online. That's store.whiskeymusings, all one word, .online. And pick yourself up, a little something. All the proceeds from those sales go directly into the show. They do not come to me. They don't pay for anything other than the show itself. And I would appreciate it if you would help support the show by going and getting some great gear. I'm wearing one right now. Got to get out of the way of the mic. For those of you that are watching on YouTube, you can see I had to get out of the way of the mic to see the logo. But anyway, it's Whiskey Musings logo gear. Once again, store.whiskeymusings.online. And I also have some t-shirts and things that have my tagline, "When I drink, I think." So, the political climate and everything set up today, I'm sorry. I would have to say that even though, a lot of people have claimed that as a country, we haven't been this divided in several decades. And I can say growing up in the time that I did that yeah, it's actually been quite some time since there has been this split of, at least from the standpoint of the feeling of the split. There's been we've had several times where disagreements have broken out, and we've had disagreements about where to lead the country and that kind of thing, but in general, I would say, at least up until 9/11, and especially right after 9/11, the country itself kind of brought itself together, and we all bonded together as a whole, believing in America and America's values. We didn't often agree on how and when and where we were going to get there, and the pathway being chosen to get there, but we did have a common belief in terms of American values, American standards, and so the arguments generally tended to be not so much about America as a country. It tended to be back then that it was more arguments about well, what sort of things are we going to do in order to attain America's values and keep America's values. But that's a lot of that's changed, and I don't know if it's just my getting older or what the situation is, but I can tell you that the feeling that I'm getting, generally speaking, is that we are more divided today than I think we have been in many, many, many years. Um, I honestly don't know where to go with this, but as far as like what can be done to heal it, uh, I really don't, and I'm just a common individual. But at the same time, though, I think we have to understand that there are certain values, certain beliefs that, especially in the conservative camp, that we can all generally tend to agree on. Um, and so, toward that end, I wanted to bring up a meme again that's been running around for several years. I've seen it. It talks about conservatives versus liberals. I think we can say this is more conservatives versus, say, leftists rather than just liberals. Um, but I'm going to bring that up. And of course, for the audio listeners, I will go ahead and read it real quick. Um, and let's see which one? It's this one, I believe. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so the way this thing is kind of laid out, starts off with, if a conservative doesn't like guns, he doesn't buy one. If a liberal or a leftist doesn't like guns, he wants all guns outlawed. If a conservative is a vegetarian, he doesn't eat meat. If a liberal or a leftist is a vegetarian, he wants all meat products banned for everyone. If a conservative is down and out, he thinks about how to better his situation. A liberal wonders who is going to take care of him, a liberal/leftist. If a conservative doesn't like a talk show host, he switches channels. A leftist or a liberal demand that they don't like, pardon me. Let me read that again. Liberals demand that those they don't like be shut down. If a conservative is a non-believer, he doesn't go to church. If a liberal/leftist non-believer basically wants any mention of God and Jesus silenced. If a conservative decides he needs health care, he goes about shopping for it, or may choose a job that provides it. A liberal/leftist demands that the rest of us pay for his. Now, that kind of, honestly, I mean, that just sort of sums up the whole situation in terms of today's world. I mean, if you think about it, everything that's happening in today's world is pretty much, yeah, if a conservative doesn't like something, they generally, they don't care about the rest of the world. They only care about what's affecting them directly. And so if they don't want it, then they just don't buy it. They don't care necessarily about the rest. If it happens to be with, vegetarian or whatever, they generally, it's like, hey, I'm not the controlling type. And that's really what this kind of boils down to, is a controlling personality, somebody that wants control, wants government control, wants a hierarchy control, versus freedom loving and choosing your own set of values and what you want, what do you want out of life, those kinds of things, and that's just the start of this whole scenario. Because if you look at it, everything that is going on in today's world, it pretty much boils down to that whole thing. If you look at, vaccines as an example, especially right now. I mean, Biden, who is a liberal or a leftist, he is a Democrat. He is announced earlier that he wants to go door to door to get everybody to get the jab. If it was a conservative, it'd be like, hey, if you don't want to get the jab, fine. But keep in mind that anything that happens, if you don't want to get the jab, anything that happens is all on you. That's your problem. And that's kind of that basically, again, that meme sort of sums up everything in terms of the difference or the dichotomy between the two thought processes. So I have kind of put together a list of what I would consider very common core conservative values. And these common values are things that I think I've found when I've talked to just about anyone who is a conservative, that I have found that these are common across the board. Regardless of whether you're listening to somebody who is a famous conservative, or if you're talking to somebody on the street, generally speaking, these core values kind of tend to be the same across the board for pretty much any conservative that you run across. And so let me go ahead and bring those up. Let's get rid of that. Bring this up. Okay. So one of the first things that I think that we run across in terms of conservative values and conservatism in a general sense, the first thing, obviously, is the belief in God given rights. And by that, I mean that by God given rights, I'm talking about the rights of Americans, not not from the standpoint of just the Bill of Rights, the ones that are in the Bill of Rights, but the fact that we as individuals, we as humans on this face of this earth have been given rights handed to us by our Creator. These are reflected in, our conservative belief in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. I mean, the Declaration of Independence declared that we were endowed by our Creator with the right of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that kind of was the beginning, the thought process that went into everything that followed, including the Constitution. But the Constitution itself only defines those rights. And this is and realistically, the reason why it defines those rights is it defines them for the fact that we're dealing um, with a government that had to be told and controlled off of what those rights were, and so, the Constitution basically defines them, but tells the government, says, look, you can't touch these. Um, but the thing about conservatives is that we do believe in what Dan Bongino calls them, the big R God given rights, and I agree. They are the big rights. They're the right to free speech. They're the right to, keep and bear arms, the right to be secure in your persons, the right to assemble, the right to freely practice your religion. These are all things that follow in the conservative movement. And in terms of religion, we also have, generally speaking, and again, not everybody, but generally speaking, conservatives do actually believe in some type of religion. Not all, but most generally do believe in some type of religion, whether you're, a Catholic, a Protestant, Jewish, whether you are, you know, um, uh, Islam, Buddhism, any of those. Generally speaking, we have, as a general rule of thumb in conservative, we have a belief uh, in a higher power, a higher being. Again, going back to the Constitution and the Declaration, we have the idea of a higher being, a creator. There is something of a higher power that we as conservatives believe in. And so, because of this, this kind of stems where everything sort of flows from is the idea of God given rights, that we have rights as humans. We have things that are our rights, and we believe in them as conservatives. And this is very important because, again, all of everything comes and stems from the idea that we are given these rights, that these are not rights given to us by government. These are rights given to us by God, by the higher power that controls the universe or that we believe in, whatever that God happens to be. Okay. So that's what I would say is probably the top or the first one, although these are not necessarily in order or in any order of importance either. So the next one that comes up, that comes into play, is we as conservatives, we believe in individual freedom, responsibility, and accountability. And realistically, what this means is that we as individuals are responsible for ourselves, but we are also accountable for our actions at the same time. And that we have our own choices to make. And that, you know, we as individuals are the ones that are in charge of our lives and making our choices. And I've got a listener here on the live chat and YouTube saying peace, who's Peace World, saying, what if you're an atheist? Well, you know, that's what I was saying. As far as conservatives are concerned, you could be an atheist and still be a conservative. Being following a religion is not necessarily a requirement in terms of being a conservative. I'm not trying to outline that. In general, when you speak about, conservatives, you speak to conservatives, in general, you'll find that they will be believing in some sort of order to the universe. It can be anything, but it has some tenets within the religious, generally the religious system. And again, that doesn't necessarily mean that if you're an atheist or not, that you can't be a conservative. None of that, that part doesn't matter. But believing in some sort of structure and some sort of order seems to be a common value, and that generally stems from religion. At least in my experience, it generally stems from some sort of a religious background, but that isn't a requirement. But again, individual freedom and responsibility and accountability are part of this. And, having the belief in things like integrity, ethics, morals, standards, again, a lot of these things are tied into the idea that human beings are responsible for themselves. They're accountable for themselves. They might be accountable to other powers and other beings and other sets, like in terms of laws and American law and that kind of thing. We are accountable to the laws of the land. We're accountable to local law, state law, federal law, that kind of thing. Eventually, if you do believe in religion, eventually you might be accountable to the higher power, the higher being, the creator. But, you find in terms of the conservatism movement, you'll find a lot of people have more integrity. They have ethics, they have morals, they have standards that they go by, that they are values that conservatives do hold for moving forward. For the conservative movement as a whole generally has these things. The next one kind of falls into that category too, which is we do believe in law and order. We do believe in a semblance of law and order. And by law and order, I mean, again, going back to those the accountability, the responsibility, integrity, ethics, morals, standards, all of these things kind of tie together. We believe in a law and order system. We we do believe that in the American system of justice, that justice should be blind. Is it always? No. And again, we're not, as a conservative, we don't necessarily believe that the system is perfect, because the system is not. It's not perfect, and we need to try and fix the things that are wrong. If you can call out a specific instance, or call out a set of instances that we can fix, that we can try and come up with a rule or something that changes the events that are happening, that's what we consider law and order. But just the idea of having laws and having a system of justice and having, again, accountability, this kind of falls into a lot of these sort of tie together, but having that accountability and the responsibility to be accountable to yourself, that's definitely something that we believe in. Now, again, does the system work as it stands today? For the most part, I would say probably. And I would say, yeah, for the most part, it works. There are outlying, there are issues that we do have, and unfortunately, there are things that are going on, especially in today's world, that we are, unfortunately, the justice system is kind of allowing to happen. And this, in particular, this bullet point, this is a really, really big thing, because if you look at things like the weaponization of the Department of Justice, the FBI and the CIA, and some of the things that have happened within the last, 5-10 years, you start to see that law and order is breaking down. And this is a big, big challenge that we have in today's world and today's America, is because of the fact that law and order all by itself is sort of a foundational building block to which, all of the American tenets are out there. And, there's like, Peace World points out, we have racism, we have hate, and we have violence that's all out of control. And you could, as far as I'm concerned with those particular pieces, I mean, hate and violence, you're right. Hate and violence are out of control. I think that, unfortunately, with the racism piece, I'd really like to see more or less sensationalism in order to make a qualifying statement on racism. But as far as like hate and violence, absolutely. I mean, you could look at last year or the year before with all the riots that happened. You could even talk about January 6th as an example, even though, January 6th, in comparison to the year prior, you can basically make the comparison that January 6th was relatively minor in comparison to the rest of that time. But at the same time, though, I'm not condoning either one. I don't, because again, as I've pointed out on multiple times on the show, this is, any kind of violence for political gain or purpose is wrong in any way, shape, or form. In terms of, law and order too, this is part of the reason why, people talk about like the elections and the election process. As conservatives, we tend to sit on the line of, we need to make sure that first of all, that everybody gets a chance, because everybody gets it. And I've got a bullet point on that here in a minute. But the point is that, the rules, the structure, the law, the order, all of that has to fall into place. And unfortunately, in today's world right now, there's a lot of things that aren't adding up. They're not following, there's things that are happening. You could talk about the elections process. You could talk about the differences between the rioters that occurred and the riots that occur even today, still in, Portland, Oregon, as an example, the riots that are happening down there and how they're being treated, and those people are being treated. And then you go to the January 6th people who've been demonized, have reportedly, and I'm not saying this is true or not, but have reportedly been placed into custody and not being given access to, their information so they can mount a proper defense. They're not being, given. They haven't been released. I mean, they're being charged with like trespassing, which, okay, again, it's a breaking of the law, but it's in the relative scheme of things between that and destroying and burning buildings and taking away people's livelihoods and lives. I mean, people were beaten to death in the streets in a lot of these cities. And, when you look at law and order, this is where conservatives tend to have a bit of a problem with what's going on, because they're starting to see that, hey, look, this is really a problem. On one hand, you're handling people with kid gloves, and on the other hand, you're handling them, you're being overhanded. And if that's an element of, our justice system breaking down, fine, then let's fix it. But we can't sit here and apply two different standards. And this is where, a lot of conservatives fall into again, the category of where they're sort of shocked and in a bit of a denial in terms of the standards that are being placed out there. You've got a double standard running and you've got a normal standard running, or, a light standard and a heavy standard, whatever kind of standard you want. I mean, I've even said it on this show. As far as I'm concerned, it's one rule that applies equally across the board to anyone. Doesn't matter what their status is, doesn't matter what their, if race, creed, color, doesn't matter. None of that matters. You have one standard and everybody follows that same standard. And what you choose that standard to be is whatever it is that you want. And in general, conservatives kind of follow along that same line of thinking. I don't know if anybody caught it, but I know that there's there was a Twitter account. I can't remember the name of him, but he all of the conservative pundits are talking about it. I mean, if you talk about, anyone, I mean, Ben Shapiro, Sean Hannity, Tucker Carlson, Dan Bongino, they're all talking about it. This person, we don't know who it is, but this person wrote a 30 element or 30 segment Twitter thread about the whole elections and where conservatives are coming from. And it actually was pretty insightful, because it kind of framed the whole category in terms of the elections process and what happened in 2020, in the 2020 election, that really made, it makes a lot of sense, especially when you're looking at it from a conservative point of view, as to the position as to where conservatives are getting some of their ideas and their lack of trust in governmental systems that we had typically been standing on. That the FBI is above board. That all of our systems of justice, they operate appropriately and that kind of stuff. And it also sets up the idea, again, of the whole concept that there is a bureaucratic nightmare that is a part of the government, that you could call it whatever you want. You could call it a cabal, you could call it the swamp, whatever you want. But it's this idea of law and order. It's this idea of responsibility and accountability that causes a lot of conservatives to basically get taken aback by what's happening in our government today. I mean, Watergate was a huge scandal when it happened. And, even now, it's like we're still seeing a lot of things that are going on in our government. And, unfortunately, conservatives tend to think that it's sort of a joke, but if you think about it, it's sort of like we believe in the whole Superman idea. We believe in truth, justice, and the American way. We're the ones who have a huge thought process in terms of, we want to see right and justice and America and that kind of stuff happen. And that's where conservatives are kind of falling into place. And it's dealing with law and order. It's stemming from our idea of responsibility and accountability and integrity and ethics, moral standards, so on and so forth, following the laws, following the Constitution. And in that, it's all based all within that same thing, which is why you see a lot of conservatives coming out and are, taken aback and aghast at some of the stuff that's going on. I mean, as an example, you have, Hunter Biden. He, there's been, and again, truth, I don't know, but there's been things that have come out about him prior to the election, and it wasn't even allowed to be aired on social media. Social media did a campaign to cut it all out. They call it all lies, but it's one of those things where it's like, okay, we need to sort of explore this. Same thing with an example, again, in terms of Axios, which is a left-leaning organization. And Peace World mentions in the chat that Tucker Carlson is a bad joke. Well, whether he's a joke or not, he ended up being the subject of an NSA data pickup. And whether he did it, whether he was the subject of it, or whether he was the primary subject, or whether he was just picked up as part of the sweep, that still kind of gives conservatives pause, because of the fact that we have the Fourth Amendment in the Constitution, where we have the right to be secure within our persons without warrants being issued. If a warrant or something of probable cause and that type of thing hasn't been put out, we believe that we have the right to be secure within our persons and papers and effects. And just the mere thought of something like that happening puts a big pause on Americans, on the conservative Americans especially, because again, we believe in the law and order. We believe in the justice. We believe in the stand, the ethics, the morals, the standards, the integrity. We believe in all of that. And so because of that, a lot of what we see going on today is, to be honest with you, it's a bit of a shock. It really is. Okay, to move on to the next point. We do, as conservatives, we do believe in a limited government. We don't necessarily believe, and this varies. We don't necessarily believe in the fact that government needs to go away. But we understand that government is a necessary evil, and that was actually a discussion that had occurred between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists back when the Constitution was being written. It was an argument based on the idea of states' rights versus federal rights. And the Anti-Federalists didn't want any kind of a federal overarching government. They saw it as a big evil. Whereas the Federalists were like, look, we kind of need to have something. What it is, it should be small. It should only be focused on certain things. And that's sort of the tenets that conservatives believe in. We believe in a limited government. We believe that government should not necessarily have to dictate to us what we're allowed to do, what we're not allowed to do in terms of individual freedom, responsibility, and accountability. Now, that being said, that doesn't necessarily mean that government needs to just be abolished and go away. Because again, going back to that whole law and order and structure idea, we do understand that there is a reason for government, that there is a purpose for government. But in general, you will find that most of them are like, look, as long as it's not overreaching. I mean, we understand the purpose of having systems like, the FBI, like the CIA, like the NSA, like local police. We understand the need for these systems, but we don't necessarily believe that they should be the end all be all. That, again, going back to the individual person, you have, as an individual, you have the responsibility, you have the accountability and the setup. You are responsible for your own self and to make sure that you're not harming others around you with what you do. And so that in that sense, government doesn't necessarily need to dictate in our lives what we need to do on a day-to-day basis. So we do believe that government does need to exist. We just don't think it needs to be as big as, especially the way that it's been as of right now, with the federal government as it stands, and in some states, some state governments as they stand as well. This one, a lot of people, especially those on the left, really don't think that conservatives actually want opportunity for everybody. And that's a misnomer because most of your mainstream conservatives, and I'm not going to argue anything about, far right, neo-Nazi, neocons, whatever. I'm not going to argue with them. They exist. I know that they're out there. In general, your mainstream conservatives are basically, hey, if you're willing to put in the work to go after an opportunity, go for it. That is entirely up to you. We also believe, in terms of opportunity for all, we also believe that the outcome from that opportunity and the work that you put in should be yours. It should go to you. The work that you do on a regular basis, on a daily basis, should belong to you. Your wages should belong to you. They don't need to be given to somebody else. You have opportunities. You have the availability to do the things that you want to do in whatever way you feel like your life needs to go. And that's what, that tends to be a bit of a misnomer, especially by those on the left. They all believe that we don't want this. As what I would consider as a mainstream conservative, and I do kind of land sort of in the realm of sometimes libertarian, sometimes conservative. I mean, it just, some of these tenets kind of mix between a few of them. But the fact of the matter is, if you have an opportunity and you have the ability to go after it and you're willing to put in the work to get there, go for it. There should be nothing stopping you. There should be nothing stopping you. And it doesn't have to deal with, whether you have a certain skin color or anything else. I mean, there's challenges for everybody. There really is. Some people, unfortunately, maybe they started out a little bit better than others. And that happens. Unfortunately, that's life. That is what, essentially, going back to the whole idea of the creator and the order to the universe, that's where you've been. So, opportunity for all, for anyone that comes to the country with the idea, again, the law and order, the structure. I mean, we're not basically just opening up our borders and saying, hey, anybody comes in and you can automatically do this stuff. No, you need to follow the laws. You do need to be part of our system of government, however flawed it may be. You do need to be a part of it. You do need to follow our laws. You do need to follow the order. But that being said, other than that, opportunity is available for you. Go for it. Anyone should be able to go for and do whatever they need to do in order to extend themselves, make themselves a better person, bring themselves up to whatever standard of living that they feel comfortable with. And if that means going after, billions and millions and billions of dollars, if you're willing to sacrifice all of the things that you have to sacrifice in order to be able to do that, go for it. Go for it. And, to your point, Peace World, I'm going to say it's not necessarily a Democrat or Republican thing. Okay. And you're basically saying that Republicans have totally lost their minds. Well, you could say the same thing somewhat about Democrats too. I mean, to be honest with you, both political parties have sort of gone off the rails. And this is this is really a big problem for us. And for just regular average mainstream Americans, we look at this and we're like, okay, wait a minute. Both parties are going nuts. But realistically, to kind of swing this back around, conservatives believe in opportunity for everybody, but they also believe that whatever you make is yours, that whatever you do is yours. It is a person, again, it's individual freedom. It's individual, responsibility and accountability. So the last item that I have on my list here has to deal with, unfortunately, it does have to deal with the whole idea that skin, which is an immutable characteristic, something that you are born with, okay? Character matters, okay? A person's character really does matter. And this kind of leans into pretty much everything else that we've been talking, that I've had on this list for the most part, is that a person's character is what's most important. Not skin color, not sex, not orientation, not religion. All of those things are a part of you, yes, but they don't necessarily fall into what a standard conservative would believe is what's important. It kind of wraps up into these other points in terms of a person's character, you know, integrity, ethics, moral standards, accountability to yourself, to other people, responsibility for yourself, following laws, following our structure, following everything, following the rules basically that have been placed out in front of you. Now, if the rules change, then obviously, that's our system of government. And as conservatives, generally speaking, we accept that. But character matters. A person's character is more important to most conservatives than the color of your skin. I'm sorry. I'm not sorry that that's the case. I'm saying I'm sorry that people don't seem to want to believe this. Character is what's most important. Okay. And that is something that I think is, especially in the mainstream media, is really being pushed by the mainstream media in saying that, conservatives don't believe in this. Conservatives are racist. No, we're not. In general, we're not. Not saying all of us, because there are people that are out there. We are not denying that racism exists. We are definitely not denying that, that there are people out there who focus on things, on immutable characteristics such as race and sex and so on and so forth. But, to be completely honest, character is really, and the idea of following our laws, following our rules, being part of the melting pot that is American, that's what a conservative truly believes. A conservative really focuses on these tenets, on these things. Now, whether we decide to back somebody, to be honest with you, again, as far as the political parties are concerned and everything else, we really haven't had what I would consider a great leader. We haven't had a lot of great choices in our past history. And so it's recent past history. And so I can't really say, one way or the other with regards to any particular political party. But I do know that a lot of conservatives do focus on things like America first, like American values, like making sure that American tenets, as I've kind of outlined, are followed. The Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the fact that all are allowed, if they come here and you're American and you come here and you follow our laws and everything else, hey, we're all the more happy to welcome you in and get you started on the road. But these are things that conservatives really and truly value. And if you don't value these things, then generally speaking, you're not going to fall into the conservative thought process. Okay. So, again, it has, in terms of today's world, we have such a separation. And this is where a lot of people are talking about, well, it's possible that we're never going to heal the country. Because to be honest with you, a lot of people look at conservatives one way and they look at us and they're like, oh, well, you guys are X, Y, and Z, whatever that is, racists, you hate anybody who isn't white, so on and so forth. Well, no offense, but we also look at you and we're kind of doing the same thing. We're as a conservative, we're looking at somebody who is leaning totally to the left, who is saying, hey, you know what? And this is what's happening in the world is, you're white, you're automatically a racist just because of the color of your skin. And most mainstream conservatives, like I just pointed out, we're looking and going, wait a minute. No, just because I'm white doesn't mean I'm racist. And by you saying that just because I'm white, I'm racist, that in itself is a racist statement. So, again, I feel as though the divide is really there, that it's really grown in the last, let's say, 10 years. And unfortunately, we haven't really found anybody who's been able to heal us and bring us back together again. But the fact of the matter is that if you're a conservative, you generally follow the idea of, again, the points that I brought up. The Constitution. We stand for the Constitution and the tenets and the ideas of the Declaration of Independence. We're not saying that it's perfect. We're not saying America is perfect, but we can say with fair certainty that America is better than pretty much most of the rest of the world in many areas. Maybe not all of them, but in many areas. And it's sad to think that we as a country have gotten into this nasty divide, have gotten to the point where we've broken this focus on trying to get America to where it needs to be in terms of the best country that has realistically been formed on the face of this earth, where people are actually in charge. That's questionable. That's subject for a different show, but the whole idea of government being ruled by the people has never been done before. This is, people call this the American experiment because it's never been done before. And here we are. And the only way that this works, to be honest with you, is if everybody pulls together, regardless of our differences in belief, that we pull together and we understand that there are core tenets, core values, a foundation of our society. And that's what's being shaken today. That's what's changing. That's what is in focus in today's world, and why you see a lot of people who are just, I'll be honest with you, many of us are just like dumbfounded in terms of like, where did all this stuff come from? How did it get here? And whether or not we've had blinders on, I don't know. You could say we've had blinders on. You could say we just don't want to see it. But the fact of the matter is that there isn't a lot of what's being thrown out in the mainstream media going on in general things. And I kind of disagree with the idea that Donald Trump is the cause. Donald Trump is not the cause. This has been around for much longer. There's no way that one man in less than 4 years created all of this. He may have unmasked it, but it was there below the surface a lot longer than that. A lot longer than that. Anyway, so those are my thoughts in terms of conservatism. And I truly believe that one of the ways that we need to be able to focus on each other and bring our country back together is if we start to recognize some of our commonalities and focus on our commonalities before we start the whole name calling and everything else. We need to focus on what's common to what's happening with today's world and to try and heal the country, to bring us back together. And that's my final Whiskey Musings thought for the evening. Once again, if you enjoy the program, please do me a favor, let your friends and family know. Try and get other people to subscribe. You are my only source of, shall we say, publicity, per se. And again, if you like the program and you haven't already done so, please subscribe, click the bell so you get notified when I go live or when I post another video. And if you're on Spreaker, and listening to the audio portion of the program, you can listen on Spotify. You can listen on a bunch of different podcast forums as well. I would appreciate if you would subscribe and follow me there as well. Have a good evening, everybody, and have a good weekend. We'll see you all next week on the Whiskey Musings broadcast. Good night, everyone.